Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for coming to the launch of the Institute of Social Responsibility. Before I introduce Jane, I've got a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, I had this great idea this week that I would channel Lady Hale and wear a really serious brooch. But then I realised that although it's 100 years old, it's made of bakelite, which for the uninitiated is the earliest form of plastic. And it's in the shape of an aeroplane, so it doesn't really go with the Institute of Social Responsibility. But it is the right colour, so, 1 out of 3 isn't bad, I suppose. So, before I introduce Jane, I'm going to give you a very, very quick 5-minute précis, if you like, of what is the Institute of Social Responsibility. Then I'm going to hand over to Jane Brophy, MEP, and she's going to talk for about 20 minutes. And then we'll take some questions, and I think we have a roving mic, although in this room you can probably shout those questions anyway. And Jane's happy to take questions on all things, including things that begin with B and end with exit. So, just a very quick précis then of the Institute for Social Responsibility. As I'm sure some of you know, actually, we used to be called the Institute for Public Policy and Professional Practice, or I4P, and this was set up by my predecessor, Professor John Diamond, now retired, lucky him, on the beach somewhere. And he set this up in 2000 to respond to the government's plan to adjust, if you like, our public policy to take account of austerity following the 2008 financial crisis. But I4P was so successful under his tenure that it kind of ballooned into something that was way more than public policy and started to look at a much broader range of issues in terms of migration, race, gender, sexuality, corporate social responsibility, and so on. And so when I took over this post last year, I decided that we needed to reposition the Institute, or really change the name so that it actually reflected what it did. And so we now have a new mission. And this is the mission which I wrote, which is very wordy. But in effect, what we are doing is we are trying to capture as an institute the broadest possible range of conceptualizations of social responsibility from right across the university. We want to engage in as many of those debates as we possibly can. And so we're kicking off today with Jane to talk to us about and to kick us off to think about some of those debates. But we have got a number of events in addition to this one coming up. And the first one is the Festival of Ideas. And this is a 2-week free festival of all kinds of different events to prompt us to think about things that really impact us in the early part of the 21st century. Our flagship event is going to be the 60th anniversary of the Trinity Girls Brass Band on Wednesday, the 23rd of October in Hale Hall. I'm very, very excited about this because this is one of the only all-female brass bands in the country, and one of our members of staff is a member of that band, but you'll have to come along and see them to find out which member of staff that actually is. They're going to play us a range of music, and it's going to be a really great evening. We also have coming up in November, we have our very, very first knowledge exchange event that ISR is sponsoring, looking at sustainability in our region. And by our region, I mean very specifically Ormskirk and this part of Lancashire. And we are engaging in lots of different community groups and having a kind of festival of sustainability, if you like, on that afternoon. And quite a few of the academics in this room are involved, and this is open to everybody here, students, staff alike. We've got, though, more than this, and if you go onto our website, which is on everything that's in your free goodie bag, if you don't have one, please take one on the way out. Everything in this bag is sustainably sourced, recycled, etc., etc. No one was harmed in the making of this, except perhaps Danny, by stuffing them all yesterday. And we've got a very, very full programme of events, and more events to come as we continue to support staff events right across the university and continue to contribute to the research culture that we have right here in Edge Hill. This is the team. This is me. I'm Professor Jo Crotty. I'm the director. I also have the Associate Director, Victoria Foster, sat in the front. We have the ISR Fellow, Professor Claire Parkinson, also sat in the front, and Danny Harkness, who I think many of you will have met, handing you a piece of cake. She is actually the person that really runs ISR. She's our administrator. So that's all I want to say about ISR. I am very excited to now introduce Jane Brophy, MEP. Jane has been a long-term friend of mine. We have been political campaigners together for a very long time, myself and Paula, all three of us. But somehow, out of the three of us, Jane was the one that actually managed to get herself elected. Jane is, I think, she would agree, an accidental MEP. As I'm sure you know, we were supposed to leave the European Union on the 31st of March, but we didn't. And so we ended up having European Union elections, which we weren't going to have. And she was second on the list. But you still did it. Yes. So this means that Jane is not a career politician. She has got a great biography, working in the health service, working as a dietitian. She's also been a local councillor in Altrincham for about 20 years, is that right? She was also the Liberal Democrat candidate for the Mayor of Manchester. So she's got a lot of background, a lot of experience. She's also really, really passionate about sustainability, about the environment, about animal rights, and about the protection of our planet. So I'm going to hand the rest of the afternoon over to her. Thanks very much, Jane.
Okay, thank you, Jo. Thank you for the lovely welcome, and thank you for all the people I've met so far, hoping that I'll meet you towards the end. And please just feel free to come and ask me questions, anything you can ask me, and just approach me. I'll be happy to talk to any of you. But firstly, just thank you for inviting me this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here to officially launch the Institute of Social Responsibility, and it's really wonderful to see that this unit has grown so much since first being established in 2013 as the Institute for Public Policy and Professional Practice, I believe it was, and that its remit has grown crucially and critically to examine social responsibility across the social sciences, arts and humanities. So when we think about social responsibility, it can often be seen as some sort of abstract concept, something that's reserved for somebody else to deal with perhaps. But the truth is, we all have social responsibility. We all have a role to play in shaping a better world. Every action has consequence, and it's incumbent upon us to take social responsibility and take those decisions that have a real, a beneficial and a measurable impact on the people and the world around us. So in my new role, as Jo mentioned, as a Member of Parliament for the European Parliament for the North West of England, I have the huge social responsibility of representing over 7 million people. So along with my 16 Liberal Democrat colleagues, we're part of a group called Renew Europe, and that's our European collective grouping that we work together, the Liberal group within Europe. And I'm doing all I can to stop Britain make the huge mistake of Brexit. So as Jo mentioned, as a former NHS employee and now current MEP, plus local councillor you've mentioned, some of the most devastating effects of Brexit that I see are actually on the NHS and public health, and this is impacting on the well-being of our citizens. So last week in Strasbourg, I highlighted these dangers in my speech to the plenary session when we talked about the Brexit extension. Some of you may have seen that on the news earlier on, that this discussion took place in the Parliament. So thinking about the NHS, the ability of staff from Europe to work in our NHS is severely threatened by Brexit, and we've already seen the effects of it since the referendum in 2016. Just some numbers on that. The numbers of NHS staff from EU member states, it's dropped. It was 11% in June 2016, and this year it's just 5.5%, and that's before Brexit has even happened. And the trend is particularly concerning in the areas such as nursing and midwifery. The number of nurses and midwives from the European Economic Area joining the council, the professional council, has fallen by 91% in the 2 years from 2015-16 to 17-18. 91%. So these worrying facts show that the insecurity surrounding jobs over Brexit and the social implications of Brexit have seen EU citizens becoming reluctant to work in the UK and provide those vital services in the NHS and our care services, of course, a very worrying trend for our country. So in terms of public health, the EU risks being left behind by other countries by Brexit. The EU, it provides us with unrivaled access to research programmes, such as Horizon Europe, the biggest EU research and innovation programme ever, with nearly 80 billion euros of funding available. So programmes like this, which I'm sure you all know, working with our European neighbours, they enable us to share knowledge and skills and to solve issues and find practical solutions. And we're often looking at areas like disease and infection. And sadly, leaving the European Union will prohibit our access to valuable research grants and initiatives like these, and it risks us missing out on the latest knowledge, particularly medical knowledge. And it could leave us without access to new medicines and methods, and we'll end up behind other countries, unnecessarily risking lives and causing harm to individuals and ultimately to our social standards. So probably many of you have already seen the news and you've heard about the government's alarming Yellowhammer report. Looking around the room, everybody heard of Yellowhammer? That's the report that was leaked that showed us what the real implications would be of a no-deal Brexit. And it was threatening longer waiting times at operations, for GP appointments, A&E treatment, shortages of medications, amongst many other really quite harmful things. And add to this the lack of access to research funding. We're faced with the worrying prospect of increased mortality rates from preventable diseases and a real steep decline in quality of life, something that probably none of us would want. But it's not just public health that's threatened by Britain leaving the European Union. Brexit seriously threatens our environmental standards and safety and our response to the climate change emergency. And this is something Joe and those who know me in the room know how passionate I am about, and it's not a recent thing. It's been my political drive for the last 30 years. So if you're ever in any doubt about the climate change emergency, the events of this summer, from the forest fires of the Amazon to the torrential rain we've had today, the flooding we've experienced here in the northwest, and even more locally, we've seen the shocking images of the near collapse of the Whaley Bridge Dam. Is anybody close to that? And this should leave you in no doubt about the climate change emergency. So if we let temperatures rise by 2 degrees by the end of the century, rather than the 1.5 degrees that is hoped for, sea levels will rise by at least 10 centimetres, coral reefs will collapse. So it's shocking to discover that this is happening even faster than the science predicted, because the actual amount of the Great Barrier Reef that's left is even faster than some of the scientists were predicting. The Arctic risks becoming ice-free once per decade rather than once per century, and current projections are really quite alarming. If we don't start tackling the climate change emergency, we're looking at temperature rises of sort of 5 or 6 degrees by the end of the century. So the margins are so tight, the damage too devastating, this legacy is too awful to contemplate. We have to act. And if we are to act, the most effective way to do this is in collaboration with other countries, influencing policy and change within the EU, because climate change goes far beyond our national boundaries and borders. So in 2015, the European Union made a huge leap in its desire to address the climate emergency, because we signed up to the Paris Agreement. This is the first ever universal, legally binding global climate change deal. Only 2 countries did not sign up, and sadly one rather large player, the United States of America, has announced that they will leave the agreement. So meanwhile, the European Union has been working hard to address this emergency and achieve our environmental goals. So the goals currently for the EU: 40% cut in greenhouse emissions, a binding renewable energy target of at least 32% of energy consumption, and at least a 32.5% in improvement in energy efficiency. So it'll come no surprise that my opinion is that these targets are not ambitious enough, but they do show a huge statement of intent amongst the 28 member states of the European Union. And I believe we should be pushing now for zero carbon emissions as quickly as possible. In the 28 the European nations, we are leading the way. Europe is leading the way. And if we go further with our targets, I believe that others will follow. So speaking with many MEPs from other countries, their key aim, they're very supportive towards the British MEPs, is to help us stop Brexit genuinely and to address the climate change emergency, and doing this by building a green and a more socially responsible economy. But as the crisis worsens, we need to face up to this, and I think we need more desire to make change. Now, personally, I believe a key reason for our lack of desire for real change is because the targets have been focused on what's actually achievable within current economic models. And really, I think what we need is a different framework of politics, and we need alternative economic values. I'm happy to answer more questions about this and what my vision for these different economic values would be. So the UK has been the first major nation to propose the 2050 emissions target, but if this really is a serious aim for our government, why are we still opening new coal mines? Why are we still extending airports? Why are we pushing forward with fracking? We should and we must look for alternatives. We must care enough to do more and to make sure we actually balance the profit with environmental responsibility. And then again, we look to the European Union and the rainforest fires this summer. The fires that were not just in Brazil and South America, across the world, in Africa, Asia, Russia and parts of Europe itself. And some of you who are political may know that the European Commission is currently negotiating what's called the Mercosur trade agreement with the South American countries. Anybody heard of that? The Mercosur agreement. So if this deal is reached the Commission, it will have to be adopted by the Council of the EU and the European Parliament. So as a member of the European Parliament, this is where we can make a difference, because I will not, and many other MEPs are similar to myself, we will not support any European trade deals with Brazil that does not include not only strong environmental protections to enforce those regulations to stop those forests being cut down, but also human rights protection as well, because again, those people live in the forest, it's their land, it's their place, they have rights. So we have to bring about change and influence international trade with environmental accountability always in mind. And real awareness of the scale of the climate change emergency and our lack of real ambition is something that needs to be raised on every occasion. And those of you who know me, I certainly will on every occasion that raise this issue every time. I believe we've got to build on the pioneering work of Extinction Rebellion, Friends of the Earth, and there's many other environmental groups that are bringing the climate emergency right to the forefront of people's minds. So we all can do more to encourage people to use public transport, stop using their cars, eating less meat. Who was vegan, who I met early on? The vegans, yes, hey. Eating less meat and dairy, and eating lower on the food chain, cutting down on our food waste, and every opportunity that embraces the 4 R's, so the remove, reduce, reuse, and recycle our waste. So I frequently think of Greta Thunberg. To me, she's a global heroine of just 16 years of age. Her speeches really, really resonate with me. My heart reaches out to her. She's a young woman who has Asperger's. I have an adult son with similar diagnosis. So these people like Greta, a special person, an alternative view of the world, and sometimes that can push through. In Greta's own words, she talks about the lies of some politicians. Someone like Greta can reach right to the point of what needs to happen. She breaks through our own hypocrisy. She breaks through our own double standards. So there's no time to pull back from our commitments. There's no time to let our governments off the hook. We've got to pressurise them into taking action and being more, not less radical in their approach to save our planet. And Brexit will only harm, not help us in this fight. So I'd like to finish by quoting a part of the preamble to the Liberal Democrat Constitution. And here it is. Those of you who are Liberal Democrats will be familiar with this. But those of you who are not, take time to look it up for yourselves. This is what it says. We look forward to a world in which all people share the same basic rights, in which they live together in peace, and which their different cultures will be able to develop freely. And with regards to the environment, this is what it says. We believe that each generation is responsible for the fate of our planet, and by safeguarding the balance of nature and the environment for the long-term community continuity of life in all its forms. And I've even got a Liberal Democrat membership card here, borrowed from somebody in the audience, and it actually prints this on our membership card. It talks about the Liberal Democrats exist to build and safeguard a free, fair and open society in which we seek to balance the fundamental values of liberty, equality and community, and which no one shall be enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity. So I try to incorporate these words into my everyday actions, and I promise you I'm going to finish now to leave time for questions. But I'd just like to repeat one thing that I said earlier about climate change and the climate change emergency. So the margins are really so tight, the damage is just too devastating. We have to act, the time is now. We must stop the harm and preserve our planet. This is the legacy we've got to leave for our children and future generations. To me, this is what it means to be socially responsible. I hope you agree, and thank you for listening. Okay, you'll have to shout the questions. Is there a little button on the end? Someone's waving at me that they know how to do it.
Ah, look at that. Right, questions. Now I've got the microphone on, no one will want to use it. Jeff.
No, I think, yeah.
Yeah. No, great talk, thank you. I suppose my question really is, I'm fascinated by what politicians can do and what they can't do. You mentioned a number of things. You mentioned the European Union's pressure on Brazil, which is obviously the counter argument is that this is neo-colonialism and that the European Union's got no right to really interfere with another country's policies. You mentioned Greta Thunberg. She's got a very clear message. It's a very depressing message. This house is on fire. No recommendations about what to do next. And I suppose my issue really is that I think if politics is about mobilizing people, then you put up a number of kind of issues about why are we doing X and Y and so on. Well, it's because what the people seem to want. They want they seem to want expanded airports because they're not thinking about the consequences. And I suppose the question really is about how politicians change the core values of the electorate to get climate change. It's certainly part of the public discourse, but in terms of changing the priorities compared to other things, because when it comes to the real politic, it's all about getting people to vote for policies which may interfere with their standard of living, their income, their convenience, a whole series of issues. Now, can politicians do that on their own?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I'm going to just summarise what the question is. So you're asking, what can politicians do? We've seen the example of Greta Thunberg, that really we know what we need to tackle climate change, but it's how to get people to be persuaded that actually to do that they might need to fly less and do more and maybe take actions they don't actually like. Well, as somebody who is only recently a full-time politician, prior to that I was an ordinary citizen and I was a councillor in Trafford. I've always believed that society works with a kind of dual approach, that if you're motivated to make change in society, as I have been for all my life, it's about that dual approach. So you work within the existing structures, you work within the government, you work in your local authority, you work with your local communities, with the European Union, going up the next level with the United Nations, and you make changes happen within those structures, because we all need structures and we all need democratic accountability, don't we? However, change doesn't happen through the politicians, change happens through the people. So that's where you get the dual approach. It goes back to a role I had as a young person. I was the last chair of the Young Liberals, and we talked about this a lot there. The dual approach is where you work outside of politics. So where I see that happening now, it's the Extinction Rebellion movement. In the late 1980s, I kind of saw that happening, even though it was early days for climate change. I kind of knew this would be the issue of the 21st century. because I knew the science. I didn't do an arts degree, I did biochemistry at university, so from that sort of scientific perspective I kind of got what's happening to the planet and what would happen to the planet. And through that science knowledge kind of predicted where we would be now. And I kind of saw that the action wasn't being taken. Like you said, people weren't keen to stop flying, people weren't keen to make the lifestyle changes, but now it's the young people coming forward, young people and the Extinction Rebellion movement. It's not just young people, but I think it's being led by young people, because I mean, I completely identify them. I'm the mum of 3 young people. And I mean, what's the point of being educated if you haven't got a future? What's the point of having, living in nice houses and a nice career when actually the ecosystems are crumbling around us? Because that's the future we're heading for. The coral reefs are collapsing, the oceans are warming, the Arctic's melting, the storms are increasing, the floods are happening. These things can only get worse. So as people see that starting to happen, they start to, I actually think we're going to be facing quite mass rebellion by people. But the thing that inspires me about Extinction Rebellion is I know how hard they work to make sure the way they protest is peaceful. They really work hard to support the young people so that they understand about peaceful protest. And my heart is totally with them. But me, myself, I'm an elected member of the European Parliament, so I'm going to do whatever I can within that sphere. I hope that answers your question. Next question. Oh, there we go.
Thanks very much for the talk, by the way. I'm setting up a political society within university for a different political party than your own. But I think a lot of what you've said today is a universal concern to people. Where there is a consensus amongst parties and indeed with our society and yourselves, could there be scope to work together in order to incentivise students towards campaigning for things like you've discussed?
What's the party you're working with?
Labour Party.
Interesting, yeah. Okay, so as part of one of the Remain MEPs in the North West, I think we stand out. As you know, for the North West of England, we have 2 Liberal Democrat MEPs, 1 Green, 2 Labour, and I think it's 3 Brexit. Yeah, that's how the numbers stack up. So there's a majority of Remain MEPs, whether from Labour Party, Greens, or the Liberal Democrats. We need to work together, and we are working together, because I've always been the kind of politician in every sphere. I actually believe in working across political boundaries. As a local councillor, I've been doing that for 19 years. And actually, it goes back to Joe Cox, who was mentioned in some of the awful debates over the last few days. We've more about what holds us together than what separates us. In terms of mobilising young people and students, I think students nowadays, compared to when I was a student, I think it's tough times, really, isn't it? The finances are harder, the climate for jobs is harder, getting a house and being able to look forward to own property is harder. Everything's harder from when I was a student in the 1980s. So my heart reaches out to young people, mobilising them. I think as part of the older generation now, I'm very much a liberal. I believe people are best organising themselves. It's not for me to dictate how young people organise themselves. I'm sure you can do that quite effectively without us oldies telling you how to do it. But yeah, I wish you well with your political group, and hopefully you can find common ground with other parties. And you've also seen how many people in the Labour Party are deciding that their party is no longer the vehicle. Plenty of Labour politicians are now looking to the Liberal Democrat as the radical force, the force to stop Brexit, the force that will move Britain forward to tackle the environmental problems. Thanks. I'll go down here and then I'll come back. Here we go.
Thank you for coming to talk to us. I think it's something we've lost as a country. We seem to have stopped talking to each other. I think that's probably why we face some of the problems we do. But I think it's unbelievable how Britain today is so similar to Europe in the 30s and how dangerous that can be. But I think we need to look at why we're like that. The divided nation didn't start at the referendum. It started in the 80s. It started under Thatcher, continued under Major, got slightly better under Blair, and then since then has dramatically declined. I think we talk about public health, talk about the insecure work, reducing workers' rights. Most wages now are the same as they were in 2008. I think, there's that disconnect there between politicians, Westminster and people. And your party was a part of that. I stood for local council recently to try and bridge the gap between working people and politicians, even though I don't class myself as one. But I'm also a nurse as well, a student nurse, and I think there's real problems until we actually look at the problems that we face and the causes of them. We can't really move forward. And the point on the climate crisis, I think we also need to tackle the economic system as well that we have, and that it kind of goes against a lot of people in our country. And I think until we tackle those problems, we're not really going to tackle the wider problem of the climate change. And also just a point on your leader.
Can I take the microphone?
Yeah.
If you could keep the questions snappier, we can get more people in. That's all. Over to you,
Okay, another really, really good question, thank you. So you're talking about tackling the fundamental causes. I think what we're looking now across the world, really, and especially from Europe, we're looking at politics changing. And you're quite right, the change has been going on for many decades. It's not something that's just happened recently. Politics is changing in the way that it's aligned, because it used to be along the north, the left-right spectrum, where you were on the left or on your right. I think we're now looking at a kind of realignment about that. We're now looking at whether you're on the liberal side of politics or the other authoritarian side of politics. And that's where you've seen the realignment within the Conservative Party. The more liberal-minded Conservatives are moving towards the Liberal Democrats. Obviously, we've always placed ourselves way within the sort of liberal, outward-looking, tolerant, that framework. And there's been quite a lot of political analysis on this base. You've got the authoritarian side. There's aspects of that within all parties. So we're seeing that realignment, and I think what's happened with the 2016 referendum for Brexit is it polarised the country along those lines about, are you outward-looking, tolerant, want to remain part of Europe, or do you want to go sort of inwards and look to your own country and look to your own situation and not look to outwards to support other people? And there, I think, things have started to change across Europe. And also about tackling inequalities. I've worked in the field of public health most of my professional career, and I know that tackling inequalities in health is all to do with tackling poverty and tackling the wealth inequalities in our society. And I actually believe that to have a more equal society would change the way we all operate. There's a book called The Spirit Level, which I think, probably looking around the room, you will have either heard of or read. So The Spirit Level is a book that I've read. It's about how in societies, the more unequal societies are, the more social problems you have. So unfortunately, Britain and America are right at the end of the scale in terms of inequality, whereas the countries that have more equal society, some of those are in Europe, like Denmark and some of the Scandinavian countries, those countries are the ones that have the least social problems. So it's quite true that the more unequal a society is, the more social problems have, the more health issues you have, the more disruption you have. In terms of moving towards a more equal society, I've always believed that the Liberal Democrats are a good vehicle for that. And having been elected during the coalition years, which you refer to, it's quite a painful time to be an elected politician as a Liberal Democrat. But at the same time, there was, within politics, nothing is completely pure. It's a messy business. It involves compromise. It involves collaboration. It involves sometimes having to do a bit of give and take on things you want to happen just to make the greater good. And it's hard. It's difficult. And as the gentleman up there talked about, working together with people who have common aim is really important. That's why within Europe, my party is placed within the Renew Europe group. We work hard. We work across boundaries as well with the Greens group, with the Social and Democrats, with the Labour group as well. It's important to make those cross-party collaborations. So to summarise my answer to your question, I think in the coalition years, although it was not very widely publicising, and it was dark days for the Liberal Democrats, I have to say, there were some positives that we achieved in terms of we did actually have the green things that we put forward were genuine and they did make a difference. The things on taking many people out of income tax did raise quite a lot of people out of poverty. It also, in terms of the aspirations to make sure we protected people on the lower end of the scale. The Institute of Fiscal Studies did a number of reports which showed that the Liberal Democrat policies were better for people on the lower end of the spectrum, and some of the Labour Party policies at the time have got the data to back that up. So I think it's about, if you have that aspiration to tackle inequality and health inequalities, and you have that aspiration for a more equal society that protects individuals, then I think the policies follow from that. I hope I've gone some way towards answering your question.
I've got two questions on this side, but I think I'm going to go over there first. Or do you want? Oh, you're looking very disappointed. You go next. Then we'll go to you there, and then you there, and then if you keep them snappy, we might be able to fit in one more. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk that you've given. Very, very interesting. Just to touch on some of the comments made already in questions about economic policy, two succinct parts of this. Would you agree that the Brexit result was to a degree driven by dissatisfaction between the UK, dissatisfaction with the UK economic policies, particularly a perception in some areas that feel left behind, that the route was was European membership when actually it was austerity policy? And also as well, would you, in the Northwest, the indices of multiple deprivation came out yesterday and showed that the North has got consistent presence in the top or bottom, depending which way you look at it, of the different lower super output areas that have got scored worst on deprivation. Would you not say that if Brexit does go ahead under whatever grounds, obviously if it does we hope it's not a no deal, is this an opportunity for West Coast ports such as Liverpool and Glasgow to actually have an opportunity to re-establish former trades with the former colonies and actually have a regeneration, not need to rely on Objective 1 or ESF funding? And do you think that regeneration would offset the loss of funding that we're anticipating if we do leave?
Amazing question. Right, start that one. Yes. So I think you're right that that the reasons people voted for Brexit were partly due to feeling left behind. But I also think some of that feeling of being left behind was quite manipulated by the Brexit campaign. So yes, it's very true, people felt left behind by austerity. And particularly in the north of England, there are areas of a really horrible deprivation, and austerity has been truly awful for people. And it's not just austerity, it's the rising income gaps as well. So you've got really desperate poverty alongside quite ridiculous wealth. And it's that contrast that is really appalling. The rise of food banks. I know I live in a nice area in South Manchester, and even there we have a local food bank that's well stocked and well supported by the local community because it's needed. Even amongst wealthy areas, there are people struggling and in poverty because they have lost jobs through ill health, all sorts of reasons, and benefits haven't come through. I don't support the austerity measures of the current government. I wouldn't have supported them during the coalition years. I think raising people out of poverty is, you heard me talk about it in the Liberal Democrat constitution, it's there. I do want to work towards a more equal society because that's the way you can tackle many of the inherent problems in the UK. I do agree with you about it being more stark in the northwest and the north of England. And there were further bits to your question as well about the funding. Personally, having actually read the Yellowhammer report, I think the outcome of a no-deal Brexit will be truly horrific for the country. I also think the tragedy of people voting for Brexit and to leave the European Union from a position of feeling left behind, from a position of poverty, is actually Brexit will make people who voted to leave because they feel left behind even more left behind. That's the real tragedy and unfortunate thing about Brexit. There's nothing about leaving the European Union that I can see that's truly going to benefit people in poverty. I'm part of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. I'm a lead member for my group on that committee, and there are so many benefits to being part of the European Union. I lead a file on the European Globalisation Fund. That's a file of money that gives away resources to people who have suffered adversely from economic hardship due to losing their jobs. In the European Union, there are people who will will suffer from Brexit. I was only speaking about this in Employment Committee yesterday, who will get access to that funding if Brexit occurs because they will lose their jobs as a result of Brexit. Unfortunately, if Britain leaves the European Union, then our workers won't have access to that fund because that fund is there to protect people who are facing hardship due to big changes to their job, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises that employs many people. So unfortunately, I can't really see anything positive about leaving the European Union, although I am an optimist, and if it happens, we'll all do our best to make things the best we can, and those of us in political roles or with responsible roles, obviously we're going to do our best to try and make the best of the situation, but I really can't see that trading with Commonwealth countries is going to be a substitute for being part of the European Union.
Snappy, if you can.
So we heard a lot today about tolerance and how you want to bridge the gap between parties, and I think that's quite a nice, refreshing thing to hear in such a divided society. However, you have criticised the current government members and the way that they speak in Parliament to be maybe inflammatory, like some of your colleagues in the Liberal Democrats. However, do you not believe that maybe some self-reflection on the way that the Liberal Democrats speak about the Brexit debate could perhaps assist in this joining of different parties? Because of the way that you just spoke when you mentioned how those who voted Remain were forward-thinking and tolerant, it kind of gives a feeling of implication that those who did not vote to Remain, those who wanted to leave, are intolerant. They're inward thinking. They don't care about society. But perhaps that, while you may not agree with some of the economic reasons, perhaps a General Joe, working class man in the middle of Manchester, didn't vote for Brexit because of the apparent Polish people or Romanian people that stole their jobs. Perhaps he saw that the tariffs that the EU placed on African food goods was an actual issue, and without the EU tariffs, we could trade with these African nations and get cheaper fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, and another really good question, and this is about language. I have personal strong ethics about language because I do think that language is important, and what you say and how you talk to your fellow human beings makes a difference in how they talk back, and it makes a difference towards culture and what happens. So personally, I think the language we use, especially in public roles, needs to be moderated. In terms of the way we talk about people who voted Brexit, I am a local councillor in my ward. The majority of people there actually, it's something like 51% of people voted for Brexit. So I have a strong relationship with people in my ward. It's Timperley Ward in Altrincham, Greater Manchester. It doesn't matter to me how those people vote. They still vote Liberal Democrat, not because the Liberal Democrats are a pro-European party. They vote Liberal Democrat because they see locally we actually care about the area, we support things that benefit them, and it's not necessarily just to do about Brexit. I think in politics you've got to have integrity, you've got to stand for what you believe in, and I think people, they know I'm pro-European, they know I'm a Liberal Democrat, they know I want Remain, they know I want to revoke Article 50, they know that because I'm a Liberal Democrat, that's part of the package. That's what I believe is right for Britain. And I think if you talk about that, it's about saying this is who I am, a sense of integrity. Sometimes people who have a completely different view, like there's members of my family that would come into the category that you just described, who voted to leave, who don't support staying in the EU. Some of them who kind of would say, I don't really agree with you having your job as a member of Parliament in the European Union, but, you know, I respect what you do. You know, these are people who voted leave, members of my family. So I would say that the Liberal Democrats largely are a party under Joe Swinson that have the right kind of language, and I don't think it's, in terms of how I would speak personally to somebody who voted leave, respect is there. There were reasons, and I think as people who are in a responsible position, we're all sitting here in a university, one of the sort of areas of status within our society, really being a student and part of a dynamic, forward-looking university like Edge Hill. We are the decision makers of our society. We are the ones with responsibility. We're the ones that need to think about language and what we do. And in terms of the reasons why people voted leave, if you think about why, it's actually correlated with quite a lot of personality factors. If you go into all the data, which I have, a lot of it is down to education, and this isn't being patronising, it's actually just looking at the data, that the more educated people are, the more they tend to be pro-European. And I don't think that's just about being judgmental. I think it's just about everybody should aspire to have the same level of education. So as part of my philosophy in life, I believe in life, learn. I think just before the meeting I met a student who was perhaps a bit older than some of the other students. Where is he now? In the audience there somewhere. Where is he? The mature student I met. There he is, sitting there, reassuringly. But I actually personally believe in lifelong learning. I think if you look at the way people come from quite disadvantaged backgrounds, sometimes and I've worked in this area in public health, if you make sure people got the right environment, you remove barriers, people can turn their lives around. And I do think education and lifelong learning is a key to that, and I don't think that's patronising, especially if you take my approach to public health. It's nothing to do with like the nanny state. In my role before becoming an MEP, my job used to be working with people with type 2 diabetes to help them overcome lifestyle issues. You don't do that by patronising people, by going in and telling them what to eat, telling them they need to exercise. You go right back to where they are, what works for you, what matters to you. And for me, the key thing that starts people making changes is their mental well-being. It's how they feel about themselves. It's their self-esteem. And it goes back to the points other people in the audience have made about if you work on people's self-esteem and their well-being by putting the structures in society which enable that to happen, then people start to change their lifestyles. Then people start to think about climate change. Then people start to think about what the benefits are of working in their community, what the benefits are of having education, of looking after themselves, of looking after their families. That's my personal belief. Hope it helps.
Okay, last question.
Hi. Despite the Fixed Term Parliament Act, it appears we will soon be having a general election. At the end of the recent Liberal Democrat conference, I didn't notice Joe Swinson telling delegates to go back to their constituencies and prepare for government. What do you think are the chances of Liberal Democrat success in a forthcoming election? And what would count as success for the Lib Dems?
Well, those of us who are Liberal Democrats, and I think there's a few in the room, I'm also completely aware there's quite a few people in the room who are not Liberal Democrats. We're not a political party that's just about taking power for power's sake. We always are a political party that's about what's the right thing for Britain, what's the right thing for our communities, what's actually the right thing to do. And in some ways our party suffered because of that. I mean, we didn't go into coalition to, achieve being 5% in the opinion polls. We didn't go into coalition to, do something bad. We went into coalition because at the time we believed it was the right thing for the country. So in terms of if the Liberal Democrats take power, it will be because we are offering the best choices for Britain. People believe that we are the best party to move things forward. We're the best party that will take our liberal values forward, take our British values forward. That's when the Liberal Democrats will win. Personally, I think Jo Swinson offers the Liberal Democrats a fresh start. She's young, she's modern, she represents, a stand in society that we haven't had in government before. I think she would make a great Prime Minister. I think she also has the capacity to work with others, both inside and outside of politics. She has the capacity to build bridges, to build alliances. I'd be very optimistic that the Liberal Democrats would do very well in a general election. I'd hope they would, and let's just wait and see.
Right, well, thank you very much, Jane. That has been a really big range of questions, and somebody who really knows their European Union articles, evidently. I, if you don't mind, would like to ask you one last question. Can you tell us, in a few words, how your life has changed since you became the accidental MEP? Maybe that can be your memoir title.
Okay, so how I became an MEP. Well, as was mentioned at the beginning, you go into politics because you want to change the world. You go into politics because you want to make a difference. And for me, I didn't start out as an actual politician. I started out as an environmental campaigner. And then I realised that the vehicle to do this most effectively was to join a political party and to work within the political party. And I've been doing that for sort of 20 or 30 years or thereabouts. So how has my life changed? Well, previously my life was 3 days a week NHS worker. that's what I did, teaching people with type 2 diabetes and helping people with other types of diabetes as well. I'm a dietitian by training, an allied health professional, and I was also a local councillor for 19 years. And then I suddenly became an MEP, completely unexpected. I was the 8th person to be elected on the list. So if you didn't have me, you would have either a Tory or a 4th Brexit Party member. It has completely turned my life upside down. Firstly, anyone here who works for the NHS or has worked for the NHS? Interesting. Well, at the time, I had a 12-week notice period, and it wasn't the kind of thing, oh, you've been elected an MEP, can I leave my NHS? No, you're on a 12-week notice period. So I managed to work that notice period down to 8 weeks. So I had to work an 8-week notice period, 3 days a week for the NHS, and I had to fit in my European Parliament commitments around that, and that was basically by doing a lot of work weekends, taking days off, doing things like going to NHS work Monday, Tuesday, travelling to Brussels on Wednesday, being back in the office for the NHS on Thursday, and doing a lot of meetings Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So basically, it's really a case of working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. It's like that. Lots of travel disruption, like going down on the Eurostar on, when was it, last Sunday. There was some major incident. It took us 4 hours late, 12 and a half hours down to Eurostar on last Sunday. And on the way back, something went wrong with my ticket. So my train back was 2 hours later than it should have been. And crazy travel options. You kind of learn just to roll with these things and not get too bothered by them. The other thing that's changed my life is I'm living out of a suitcase all the time. So you can imagine it's 3 or 4 days in either Strasbourg or Brussels. Get home, unpack the suitcase, and living with that wash bag permanently packed and thinking about, will I have enough clothes to wear tomorrow? So it has completely turned my life upside down. On a personal level, I've got lots of extremely supportive colleagues. One of the first things I did was to recruit staff. Having been an NHS worker, I think you get to be a very good judge of people. So I was able to get a really high quality team around me. There's 2 of them sitting in the audience here who've come with me today, getting the right people around you to support you with all those practical issues. They're here, look, beaming, I can see them. And also I have a Brussels team as well. They are also brilliant. I was lucky enough to recruit somebody who had previously worked with one of the Irish MEPs who's retiring, who completely understands the Irish backstop, who completely understands the employment committee, and just really relying on those staff to help you with things, do your job. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey. I'd like it to continue forever because I actually do believe as a politician you can make a difference. And hopefully that can happen in either this role or in another role.
Right, well, thank you very much, Jane. And I think you'll all join me in thanking you in the usual way.